Fasten your seatbelt. I am taking you for the ride of your life. I'm going to show you what this car can really do. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Hang on.
Okay.
Here we go.
Hold on to your butts.
Go get him, kid.
It might be a tumor.
It's not a tumor. Not a tumor at all.
As if you're going to ask me. So you can go ahead and ask me what you're going to ask me. And my natural response could be to get offended.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
All right.
You're listening to the 30-something movie podcast. One movie each week, 30 years in the making. All right, it is the 30-something movie podcast. This time around, though, special episode, we are not necessarily talking about a movie this time. I'm sure we'll get there. But we're going to be talking about something that we talked about the movie last year when it was 1991 for us. But there was an opportunity for me to talk more about The Rocketeer. And so I was like, why not? So when 92 came up, I'm like, no, you know what? 91 was the movie. 92, actually the 40th anniversary of The Rocketeer getting introduced to the world in the first place. So I thought, why not? Let's talk Rocketeer. And let's talk Rocketeer with some folks that know a little bit about the Rocketeer and some of the history of the Rocketeer. So I am super, super excited to have with me tonight Steve Bryant. Thank you so much for being here with me. This has been kind of a long time coming.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. Yeah, as you well know from our discussions like at C2E2, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, so tell the folks a little bit about yourself. Now, you and I we've met several times at C2E2 in Chicago at the show. We also have a connection through your other job through Illinois State University, because I have some relatives that go there and I think are taking one of your classes right now.
Yeah. So probably the work I'm most known for, which is weird to say because as an independent comic creator, I don't know that anyone is actually known for much of what they do. But what I'm most known for is a comic called Athena Voltaire. It's the adventures of a globe-trotting aviatrix in the 1930s. And obviously influenced by movies like Indiana Jones, but also by movies like The Thin Man, because I love the banter of like 1930s screwball comedies and stuff like that. But I think we missed the boat unless you're going to do like the 90-something podcast. Then we can talk about The Thin Man. Yeah. But and very influenced by Dave Stevens' Rocketeer, both the comic and the movie. So that's probably my signature piece, as it were. And then I also teach digital painting and comics and sequential art and character design and illustration at Illinois State University.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's me.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think when you and I were talking at C2E2, I was like, I had just had the idea of, hey, before the year is out, I definitely want to do something on, the Rocketeer from the comics, not just the movie, since it's the 40th anniversary. And I was like, okay, I know Steve loves the Rocketeer, and because I've talked to you every year, that I've come to C2E2, and we tend to talk Rocketeer for a little bit every year. And I was like, okay, I got to ask him if he would just be willing to, like, I don't know, just like send me a couple of sound bites or something like that. And I was so excited when you, like, your face lit up and you're just like, I mean, do you have 3 or 4 hours? It's like, yeah, I got 3 or 4 hours. Let's go.
I still contend it's my favorite comic book movie. It just maintains the spirit of Dave's book. And the visuals are still stunning. And yeah, it's well, to move over to the movie just for a second, it. I don't know that I've really had this feeling in any other movie. Maybe the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, but where I sat in the audience and I had this moment of not quite terror, but dread, where I'm like, oh, please let it be good. I was so worried it wouldn't, that it wouldn't be good. And, just from, the word go, everything is just so perfect. So yeah, it was my favorite at the time, and it just continues undaunted at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, it was super exciting for me to have somebody else I knew I could talk to about this stuff, because I know the other guys that are usually my co-hosts on this show are going to be listening to this, but I love them all, but they don't have the depth of Rocketeer knowledge that I know that you do. So and the fact that, as you and I talked several times, and it was clear to me, and that's one of the reasons why I stopped by your booth the very first time several years ago, was I saw the big Athena Voltaire backdrop that you had, and saw the books that you had there, and immediately what clicked in my head was, man, that looks a lot like Dave Stevens. And so I was like, and that's kind of like that was a little bit of my main jam at the time too, was I was getting tired of some of the superhero comics. Like I've always been a huge I'm more of a DC fan. I've always been a fan of the X-Men. I've always been a fan of Spider-Man. I've always been, my number one is Superman. If I look over in the corner over here to my boxes and boxes of comics, I would hazard a guess and say that 70% of them are probably Superman or Superman adjacent books. But I was starting to get a little tired of superhero comics. And so I was like, well, I also pick up the Rocketeer, and I want to pick up more stuff that's, maybe a little less superhero-y, and maybe a little more pulpy. Maybe I need to find another time period that I really enjoy. And as I started kind of, digging into it, I was like, well, I love Indiana Jones. I love the Rocketeer. Really loved, like, one of my favorite Marvel movies is the first Captain America, the First Avenger movie. I really enjoy, I feel like I'm one of the few people that I know that enjoyed the Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow movie.
I love that movie.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, well, I think I know what my genre is. I think I know my time period that I really, tend to enjoy the characters and the, just the decor and the clothing and the, just the whole, the what's the word I'm thinking of? The vernacular. Lousy nickel nursers. Like I feel like I've tried to reintroduce that into modern English, and it's not taking, but I'm doing the best that I can. People at work look at me a little weird whenever I say stuff like that. But so that was kind of where I started to switch over a little bit, and I'm like, I want to find something that's a little less tights and capes, a little bit more adventure.
Well, I'm glad you found my little book. And yeah, I mean, it's no coincidence. Something that I'm going to cover when I teach character design next semester is not just the silhouette, but the way a character reads in terms of placing light and dark on the figure. And if you stand Athena Voltaire next to Cliff's Rocketeer outfit, especially if you take the helmet off, you've got dark hair, dark coat, light pants, dark boots, and it reads very similarly. So that's not a coincidence. It was. I still feel like the Rocketeer costume it's just an all-timer with that I don't know what it's called, but the center flap with the big brass buttons, and just everything about the way that the character was designed is just, it's masterful. The Art Deco swoop of the fin on the helmet, and the again, I'm not sure what the terms are, but I always refer to it as the veining on the helmet, the little arcs that like it's like trim, I guess. But the way everything works on that is, look at the way those eyes are placed and the shape of them, and the way that it reads, no matter what angle you're at, or the way that he's got the kind of the mouth hole, which is a really horrible word when you say it out loud, but just the way that all of those elements go together, it's just a brilliant costume. So anyway, that's my love letter to Dave Stevens part 1. We're going to get through like 60 parts of these tonight, I think.
Oh yeah. Well, you talk about the costume. The funny thing the other day was I actually went. I've had the same winter coat. Living here in Illinois, I've had the same winter coat that's done me right for the last probably 7 or 8 years now. And I saw one the other day, wanted to go pick it up, went to go pick it up, and then I went to work the other day, and I think I was wearing dark brown shoes, light khaki pants, and my new coat is kind of the like brown leather, looks like the Rocketeer without the big giant buttons in the front. And I come home, it's the first time my wife has seen it. I come home and she goes, "Yeah, I know why you bought that." And I looked down, I was like, oh, I wasn't even, like, honestly, I wasn't even thinking about that, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It's a good look.
It's, I think for Halloween, I might just wear that and then throw the Rocketeer helmet on, and we'll be good to go. I don't have to do anything fancy with it. So I want to get into a little bit of, some of the history of, the Rocketeer, and, most of my experience with Dave Stevens is definitely the Rocketeer. In terms of some of his other artwork, I'm not necessarily as familiar with some of his other work that he did. Obviously, as a kid, I wouldn't have known it, but growing up and then finding out that he did some of the inking of the Tarzan and Star Wars newspaper strip comics, that was cool. So I was like, oh no, I probably have seen his work, even before I got hooked by the Rocketeer and everything else when I was a little bit older. But so I'm sure, being an influence of yours, being a big influence of yours, I'm sure you've got some other insights on some of his other work. Apart from the Rocketeer, I know one of the other things that he's also fairly famous for is some of his pinup work, and especially, the Betty Page stuff. And I know that, I heard someone in an interview say something about him, and they in the way they said it was, Dave Stevens loved to look at the ladies, but like not in a creepy way. That he was really good at his drawings of women, could be, I don't know if you want to use the words, seductive or something like that, but not, it wasn't in any kind of like a questionable way. Like, that's a little skeevy.
Well, yeah, like everything about his work, with his pinup stuff, it maintains this playful. I can't really put it into words, but yeah, it doesn't really seem salacious in the way that I've seen other modern, quote unquote good girl artists. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's also the humor that they kind of put into it. I don't want to say the artist's name, but I do remember seeing a sketch cover somebody did of like Power Girl, and the caption is something to the effect of "Grab the tissues, fanboy," and it's just so creepy. Yeah. But Steven's stuff never had that. His stuff always felt like it was, like his women characters were in on it and winking and not being gross. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know how he does that, because I've looked at the work a lot of the time, and there's, again, when you're talking about pinup stuff, it's weird to use a word like innocence
Yeah.
in that context. But there maybe sweetness is a better word. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I can't put my finger on why it works. And like from an art nerd perspective, he has this wonderful ability to create like this thick holding line that's very slick, brushy line around the contours of his figures. But then for fabric or like defining a muscle contour or something like that, he'll do this kind of gestural cross contour, really loose brush line that just defines it. And there's something about the way he picks those shots where the figures all just have this fluidity to them it's just a weird precision. And I realize I'm probably going really deep inside baseball on that, but there's just a really beautiful quality to how he draws. And it's not just, obviously the pinup women are an example, but everything about what he does feels rooted in classic Hollywood. You've got the beautiful women, you've got the handsome men, and then you also have a bunch of these character actors that he'll pepper throughout it. He used most famously Doug Wilde, the creator of Johnny Quest and one of Dave's mentors, as the photo reference for Peavey. And he really brought out that whole, 1930s movie serial character actor type of quality to him. You could have slapped a prospector hat on him and you've thrown him in a Western and Central Casting would have been delighted. So yeah, Dave just really had this eye for characters that all felt iconic. Sorry, I went, I think, on a rabbit hole. Sorry.
No. That's in fact, our show is very good at going to rabbit holes. Like we
Good.
we chase something until we've just about exhausted it. So Rocketeer. So as I mentioned kind of earlier, one of the reasons why I felt like this was a good time to do it is because this year, before we get out of 2022, which we're almost at an end here, it is the 40th anniversary of the Rocketeer showing up in 1982 as a backup feature in, I believe, the second and third issues of Mike Grell's Star Slayer series from Pacific Comics. I've been trying to track down those issues. I have a couple of some of the earlier issues of the Rocketeer, but not necessarily those in particular. But I mean, my first connection to the Rocketeer and to Dave Stevens is the movie. I saw the movie first, because I was probably, 11 when the movie came out. So I saw the movie first, had not seen the comics yet, but then quickly found out that this was based on comics. And so then when I was a little bit older in middle school, that's when I was able to track down some of the Dave Stevens comics and was able to kind of check those out for the first time and love them. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And I think part of it too was the rarity of, there weren't that many stories. I could go watch a Superman movie and then I've got 80 years of Superman comics to be able to go read. I didn't have that much. So it was kind of it was almost like back in the day when we just thought there were ever going to be 3 Star Wars movies and there was never going to be anything else after that. The rarity of, well, this is all I've got. And maybe they'll write some books that'll be part of an expanded universe that I can imagine what else is going to happen. But that was kind of my first run-in with Dave Stevens in the comics. I know that you've said already that he's a big influence of yours. Do you remember what was the first time you caught wind or caught sight of a piece of Dave Stevens' work? What was it that got you the first time?
Actually, a friend of mine had, I want to say in 85 or 86, Eclipse Comics, who had picked up the Rocketeer when Pacific Comics went under, had issued what they referred to as a graphic album of it. Now we would call it a trade paperback, but it was an 8.5 by 11 and I don't know if, I think the work was not recolored for that, but I remember reading that like Dave and painter Joe Chiodo and a couple of other people were coloring the original series on photostats of the artwork, kind of a glossy photomechanical transfer that they would use like dyes on, essentially. But Eclipse collected it on nice paper, I think, for the first time, because I think those original Star Slayer and Pacific Presents books are on newsprint. And a friend of mine showed me that first graphic album, and it was right at the time that I was also starting to phase out from Marvel and DC books a bit. And I discovered indie books. And at the time, I discovered Airboy. So Airboy was my first independent comic. And of course, Dave famously did the cover for, I think, number 5 with The Return of Valkyrie. Yeah, it was just this confluence of events, of my friend showing me this Eclipse graphic album, and I had collected Airboy back issues, and I had already seen his work on that, and it was kind of that light bulb moment. I think later that year, I may be losing my timeline again. Maybe it was 87 that Comico launched the Rocketeer Adventure magazine, and I got those right off the bat, the first 2 issues, and then Comico went under, and there was this whole the comic industry buzz or whatever, the fan magazines were talking about how Dave Stevens is the laziest man in comics, and he's so slow. And the truth is, he was doing storyboards and commercial art and advertising art that paid more than comics. But also, Comico had claimed the Rocketeer as one of their assets, something they owned. So he just put the completed pages of the Rocketeer Adventure magazine number 3 in a drawer and waited until the lawsuit ended. And then Dark Horse did this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful version of that 3rd issue. And I remember that one specifically just blowing me away, because the coloring had really improved. And I think it's more about the technology. More stuff was available. I don't think they were coloring it on photostats at that time. I think they were printing it out onto Bristol board or watercolor paper, and Dave was airbrushing and then putting a black line on top of it. But holy cow, that 3rd issue still, to me, is like in my top 5 of most beautiful comic I've ever seen. Yeah. My copy is beat to crap because it lived on my drawing board. Yeah. But then Dark Horse collected that 2nd miniseries as Cliff's New York Adventure. And it's really funny because it was probably 6 months to a year before IDW announced the remastered Ultimate Collection that they did. Yeah. But a friend of mine was really into doing sending books out for library binding for his books. And I know, being audio, this won't come through, but I'll show this to you here on Zoom. I did a library bound copy of it with the original graphic novel collection. Where's it at? I don't know if you can see. Oh yeah. Happy Landing, Steve. Dave signed it, and it's got an introduction by Harlan Ellison. And yeah, I put these 2 trade paperbacks in, and then because I'm a colossal nerd, I also photocopied. I had his selected sketches and studies, sketchbooks that he sold. Yeah. And so I photocopied all of those and photocopied like a big comics journal interview with him, and I got that bound into this really cool hardcover, and it cost me like 50 or 60 bucks, and I was so proud of this book. And then within a year, IDW just released the gorgeous remastered one with the Laura Martin colors. And yeah, I mean, boy, shortly before his passing, there was just this wealth of Dave Stevens material coming out, because you also had the Brush with Passion book come out. And then IDW started re-releasing not just his Rocketeer stuff, but they did a collection with all the covers he had done, and they did a collection with all the sketchbooks, and so much beautiful work.
Yeah. Well, I love your library bound one. I mean, it looks like something that would be on Indiana Jones library shelf. It's just the color of it and the old, making it look like an old library book. I think that's perfect for the time period and the.
I wish I could buy more comics, because I well, again, I know it's not visual, but I've got a crap ton of books behind me.
Yeah.
But that was my first exposure to him. But that was a long story. Was that first Eclipse graphic album.
Yeah.
And just looking at that, again, the artwork just looked like it was not of this earth. Just so perfectly done. And the weird thing is, there's such an appreciable jump between that first miniseries and the second one, but the first one had blown me away. But by the time the second one came out, I mean, you talk about someone who was really working on perfecting their craft.
Yeah.
The guy was just a monster talent, just so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got. We're just going to go to my Dave Stevens addiction here. I think when IDW announced their artist editions, I didn't realize it was going to be a whole series, but I bought 2 copies of the Dave Stevens one from my bookshelf, and one that literally lived on my drafting table for about 3 years, because I knew that it would get beaten up, and I wanted a nice copy of it. So, yeah, I mean, looking at that guy's work in this beautiful, I should elaborate, because I realize I'm talking comic stuff on a movie podcast.
We do that.
IDW Publishing releases these volumes called artist editions, which are these really meticulously scanned and color corrected books that collect the original art at the size it was drawn, not the publication size. So most of these books are 11 by 17 up to about 18 by 24, depending on how large the artist was doing it. And you see the pencil lines underneath. You see the whiteout when they're correcting a line and stuff like that. And for the time that book lived on my drafting table, it was literally, in my mind, the Rosetta Stone of how to draw comics. It solved so many things that I'd struggled with, just looking at line weights and stuff like, how did Dave do this? So yeah, again, just I first discovered his work in 85 or 86, but it's still, nearly 40 years later, I can still, rave about why it works and why it's so good, and go off in these annoying tangents that people are going to fast forward past.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, and I love the story of how the Rocketeer kind of came to be in the first place, that they kind of, I think it was Mike Grell's comic, and I feel like they approached Dave, and they were like a couple of pages short. They needed like 4 or 5 pages of something. And the story that I remember hearing was they approached him and they're like, "Hey, we're about 4 or 5 pages short. Can you do a couple of installments for us, of these 4 or 5 page deals?" And then he's like, "Well, like anything, like what do you? Yeah, go for it. Whatever you want to do. And then of course he goes back to it, and he's like, well, I love the idea of the Commando Cody stuff, and love the idea of a guy flying through the air but not super powered. He's got a rocket strapped to his back, and just the whole idea of those old sci-fi serials with alien spaceships and the rocket packs and the ray guns and all that other stuff, and then just he had the opportunity, do what you want to do. You got a few pages, do what you want to do, and then that's how it was born. And I love stories like that, where like somebody just they get their foot in the door, and then it just explodes, and it becomes as popular as and I say as popular as it's become. I still think that the Rocketeer is not as well known as I'm sure you and I think it should be.
Oh yeah.
But I do always appreciate. In fact, when I came to C2E2 one of the first times and had kind of put together my Rocketeer costume that I wore, it was because I was like, well, I don't really cosplay, but it'd be kind of fun to do something. I don't want to do, I'm not going to dress up as the Joker because everybody does that. I'm not going to dress up as this because everybody does that. Nobody wants to see the 18th Deadpool today. What can I do that I've never seen before? And at that point in time, I'd never seen anybody do a Rocketeer costume. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do the Rocketeer. I'm going to take, a year or so, like get all the stuff together, get the boots, get the helmet, get the whatever. And the most fun I had was the first year that I wore all that stuff. It ended up being I saw somebody else wear the Rocketeer costume that year too. I'm like, oh man, I thought I had something original here. But I came in wearing the Rocketeer costume, and I had several people, like some people were like, is that supposed to be like a Mandalorian thing? And I was like, no, it's not. But then I got to tell them all about it, and like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. I said, yeah, there's this great movie. There's these comics, this great movie from the 90s. You should go check it out. But then there were enough people that were like, Rocketeer, that's awesome. And enough people know what it is. And I think that the most fun I've had, in particular at C2E2, is, and I have just around the corner on the very little wall space that I've got down here in the basement to put stuff up, is I've gotten, when I've gone to C2E2, and my biggest mistake so far is I haven't gotten one from you yet, is I go and I have stopped buying prints because I've run out of wall space, but I've been trying to get sketches done, and I've intentionally picked the Rocketeer as the thing I want to get sketches of, because the first year I started doing that, I asked a couple of different artists. I said, you got any commissions left? They're like, oh yeah, I got commissions left. Awesome. Could you do the Rocketeer? And to a single person, their faces lit up, and they're like, I've never done the Rocketeer before. I would love to do the Rocketeer. In fact, a couple of them were like, I was like, I'm sure you've got a full slate of stuff. Like, I'm going to be here all weekend. I'll come pick it up Sunday afternoon. And I had one guy, he's like, no, man, I'm bumping you to the front of the queue. Like, I've never done the Rocketeer. I love the Rocketeer. I'm doing it for you right now. If you come back in like 45 minutes, it'll be done. I'm like, no, seriously. Other people got here before me. Do theirs first. No, man, I'm doing that right now. But people get so excited. And that's, to your point of like the beauty of the art. There's almost something, I hate to use the word intangible, but there is almost something a little intangible about it, of, it's as Dave Stevens perfected his art over the years, it seems like it became more and more precise and even more beautiful than it had been. And I don't know, there's something, we were talking a little bit earlier about the design of the costume, the helmet, the characters, like you said. There is something about when you mention, especially to a bunch of artists, when you mention the Rocketeer, people just light up. They're like, oh, I would love to do that.
Well, yeah, and I have to point out, I'm not one of those people that are like, oh, I've never drawn the Rocketeer.
Well, yeah.
Not counting my own characters, I've done more commissions of the Rocketeer than any other character.
Oh, I imagine, yeah.
And I think people, when again, I don't have the biggest audience, so that's probably part of it. But everybody that is in my audience knows, I think, how I don't want to say reverent, but maybe that's the best word. I want to do it justice. And yeah, it's a big deal for me every time somebody asks me to do it, because I feel like I get to temporarily be a caretaker for this great character from this masterful artist that was taken from us too soon. I should point out, I think Dave died at age 52.
Yeah.
And oh, gosh, has it been?
I think it was 2008. Is that when he passed?
I was going to say about 15 years. So yes, 14 years ago. And I mean, just an amazing talent. And this is probably a really good time for me to mention this. Are you familiar with the documentary, Dave Stevens, Drawn to Perfection?
I was not until about 4 or 5 days ago, and then I saw that it was coming out December 2nd, and I'm like, well, I know what I'm doing on December 2nd.
Yeah, it'll be available as pay-per-view, but currently there's also a Kickstarter being run by his sister, Jennifer Stevens. I'm going to mispronounce her name. It starts with a B, and I'll just Bacom.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
If by some weird happenstance she hears this, I apologize. But they're doing a Kickstarter for a Blu-ray, and it funded in the first day.
Oh, yeah.
And I was one of those people. I saw that. I've got a documentary on artist Steve Rude, and so I mean, Rude and Stevens were kind of the first comic artists where I started to actually try to analyze what they were doing instead of just drawing my favorite character or stealing John Byrne or George Perez poses when I was in middle school. So I highly recommend. When will this podcast drop?
This one will probably drop maybe just a few days after that documentary is out digitally.
Okay. If it makes it before, I believe December 5th is when the Kickstarter ends.
Okay.
If you can include a link, because it looks like it's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm going to go sign up for that Blu-ray myself. I just saw the Kickstarter yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, a Blu? Are you kidding? Yes, sign me up." I'll tweet out. I'll send on our different social medias, links to that so folks can check it out. Because I saw some of the other stuff they were including as part of the Kickstarter benefits packages and things like that. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna buy myself a Christmas gift here.
You should.
So I was going to ask you, what is I'm going to get into like making you pick some favorites here.
Okay.
What is let's veer away from the Rocketeer for just a second. Is there a piece of work, like one single piece of work of Dave Stevens, unrelated to the Rocketeer, that is your favorite of his? Like, is there one particular sketch? Is there one particular story that you've seen of his that's not a Rocketeer story? Is there one in particular you could single out?
Oh boy. So I'm mentally cataloging everything. Hold that thought 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to break out some of the books.
Oh, go for it.
Just so I have a visual aid for some of this. Boy, hang on. Sorry, I know this does not make good audio.
Oh, no, not at all.
Although it'd be humorous to have the visual of just, I will never say embarrassing number of Dave Stevens pieces or books that I've got, but I'm trying to think of what all I've swiped. Actually, one of my favorites is probably the piece that I mentioned before, the Airboy cover. that he did
Oh,
with
yeah.
Valkyrie,
Mm-hmm.
just because it was such an iconic pose, and like looking at how he usually draws women. He draws women. I don't want to. I'll use the word realistically, even though I know that's a subjective term when you're talking about figurative work like art, because we're not covered with outlines and rendering marks on our faces. But he usually works in a lot more of a realistic or literal sense with his work.
Yeah.
But the shot he did of Valkyrie, like his drawing of Airboy on that cover is a Stevens dude, but the way he drew Valkyrie, especially in the face. So Airboy was created by a Golden Age comics artist in the 40s, I think, named Fred Kida, Kida. It might have been Kida, but I think it's Kida.
Okay.
And Dave drew her very much like a Fred Kida character. She also has very much the 1930s, 1940s eyebrows and just that kind of almost doll-like face that was fashionable during that period. But it's such a cool piece. So that would be one of them.
Yeah.
Let me keep looking to jog my memory. We're recording 2 days before Thanksgiving, and because I had today off, of course, that meant I was cleaning. I was working on cleaning the house for company.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. Now that you mention it, I think this is the best thing that I can point out, and I hope the book is still available. So it's the complete sketches and studies, and what I love about this book is so much. It's largely black and white work or sepia toned work. So you see advertising work in here. Famously, like he did a Michael Jordan Wheaties box cover. And in another life, I was a musician playing in bands, and he used to do advertising art for Roland was a synthesizer company, but they did guitar pedals. And he did this piece that's like for a sampling pedal.
Oh, nice.
So it's this Jungle Explorer with a microphone recording all the stuff around it. And I tore that out of Guitar Player magazine the first time I took stuff to have him sign. And I had him sign that first Eclipse collection and this torn out Guitar Player ad of this guitar pedal. And he started laughing and he said that was a heavily art directed job. But yeah, like what I love about this book is it's all this art in black and white. He did greeting card stuff. You see some of the storyboards from Raiders in this, and it's, if you want to get a really cool Dave Stevens book after you get the Rocketeer, I would recommend Complete Sketches and Studies, because it does give, there's not really a story in there, and most of his work was pinups and covers. But I would recommend that book just because you could just see the massive talent that he was. But I know he wanted to not really get away from the Rocketeer, but he wanted to spread out. And he had talked about another character named Mimi Rodin, where I can't find the Mimi Rodin pictures, but that was another character he wanted to do. That was a contemporary thing. And I think the biggest miss that I can think of, I wish I would have seen that. He pitched a story to DC. Have you heard this?
If it's the Superman one, I've heard a little bit.
So yeah, he pitched Rocketeer Superman.
Yes.
As a crossover. He would write it, but not draw it. I think he would do covers. And, this is comic book lore. So I know he's mentioned it in interviews. So yeah, he pitched Superman Rocketeer, and it would take place in what was the year of the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast? Was it
39, I think.
39. Okay.
Yeah.
So it take place in 39. And yeah, I believe the Martian invasion was a cover for a Nazi invasion in New Jersey, and it was going to be Superman and the Rocketeer. And at the time that he pitched it, DC was phasing out Elseworlds, and they said, this doesn't fit in our continuity.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, what a waste to be so tied to current continuity that you can't see. This is an evergreen book. This would have been gorgeous.
Well, and that was something I always remember hearing bits and pieces of that story. And one of the maybe like 2 years ago at C2E2, there was one artist, and I was like, hey, I want to get a sketch from you. And you know, he had a price up for doing a couple of characters, and I was like, oh, you know, I would love my two favorite characters, Superman and Rocketeer. And he kind of looks at me at first. He goes like, well, those two don't go together. And I was like, oh, no. If you have like a couple of hours, I can explain to you how they go together perfectly. And he's like, oh, okay, no, I'll do a sketch for you. So he did. And it was a great sketch. But it kind of reminded me of that story I'd always heard, that there was the potential for a Rocketeer Superman story, a crossover. And I don't know if you picked up, what was the most recent story IDW did? Was it the Rocketeer, The Great Race? I think was the most recent one.
Yeah, the Stephen Mooney one. I didn't pick it up yet, and I will admit it hurts. I just, you know, it's one thing to see big name people doing it, you know, like Darwin Cook drawing.
Yeah.
You know, the Rocketeer, but seeing someone who kind of came up around the same time as me, I have to admit I was green with envy.
Yeah.
So I didn't check it out.
Okay.
I want to, but that's one where I just feel like I wish I knew the right people to pitch to.
Yeah. Well, if you end up picking up the copies, I don't know, they haven't collected it yet. I think it just finished maybe a couple months ago. If you end up picking up the copies, that's where I saw the story again about the Rocketeer Superman crossover. Was in the back of each of the issues. They had these, I want to say it was like 7 or 8 pages of, you know, I think it was because of the 40th anniversary, just interviews and stories about Dave Stevens and other things that he had tried to pitch and things like that. And that's where I ended up reading again. I was like, oh, Superman Rocketeer, that would have been so good, because I just picture in my mind, there was a Superman novel that came out. I almost want to say it was around the time that Dave Stevens passed. And it was called It's Superman by Tom DeHaven. And it was a very like pulp noir Superman story. Like everything is very realistic. Everything is very, it's set in the 1930s, and it's Clark Kent Superman as a kid who, you know, left Kansas during the Great Depression and came to Metropolis, and everything is very much in the kind of 1930s, 1940s vein. And I always thought, I'm like, that style of Superman, like being told in that decade, mixed in with the Rocketeer, would be perfect. Like my head started swimming with, oh, I can think of all these different ways we could tie these two characters together and have them team up with each other. And it's just that like jump-started my imagination when I first read that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's not a big jump from in the Rocketeer movie when you get the animation of Hitler's plan, and it's done in the Fleischer studio style.
Yeah.
And it's reminiscent of Superman fighting giant robots in the Fleischer cartoons. I mean, yeah, it's the Fleischer cartoons, and it's also, to draw back to one of your pulpy things you mentioned earlier, it's Sky Captain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Superman in Sky Captain. And boy, I know that the thinking is, people don't want to read period stuff and all that. But I feel like whatever you do, if you do it right, people will read it. You know, there's a reason why the first Elseworlds, Gotham by Gaslight by Brian Augustin and Mike Mignola, is still great because it's a great story. It's not that it's steampunk or Victorian era.
Right.
And I feel like The Rocketeer is another one of those things that transcends the period. Although, we've been talking a lot about Dave's art. Can we talk about the writing a little bit real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in some ways, the writing also circles back to the art because comics are a visual medium. So the art tells the story just as much as the words do. But in addition to, I think you used verisimilitude earlier, just the accuracy that Dave draws the period, that pulls you into the story. And I feel like that's invaluable. And I feel like people talk a lot about how pretty the drawing is, but they don't really talk about how immersive it is and how that serves to tell the story. And the fact that all of his like the vernacular of the characters when they're talking, the slang is just spot on. And to that end, Can I do a dramatic reading? Not really a dramatic reading.
Please do.
But this is from the. I'm gonna read just bits from a couple paragraphs from the introduction to the first graphic novel or collection, and this is science fiction author, speculative fiction author Harlan Ellison, who was born in, I think it was like 1933, 1934. So he says, I work to music, write to it, always have. So I pulled out a special cassette and dropped it. And Dave is visiting Harlan at the time. So Harlan's putting in some music and dropped it into the carriage of the old Bang & Olufsen. It was music specifically selected for the mood of what I was about to write. Music from the period of the Rocketeer. So we jump ahead. He says, I said nothing to Dave. I just slipped the cassette into the carriage, hit play, and as I sat down at the typewriter 11 minutes ago, the huge quad electrostatic screen here in the office began to emit the sound of whatever, recorded on February 28th. 3 years, more than a quarter of a century before Dave Stevens would be born. That's Jesse Crawford, Dave said, as the first 4 bars of At Sundown on the Wurlitzer resonated through my office. And I know I'm staggering through the reading, but yeah, the whole thing is Harlan Ellison is picking this obscure cut to write the introduction to the Rocketeer while Dave is in his office. And he puts in this mixtape, and Dave instantly recognizes it. And I feel like that is one of the things that's really nobody really covers a lot in the writing, is that Dave knew the period. So when he's like creating the Bulldog Cafe, those kinds of things were all over California at the time. These funky little buildings that were these fun shapes.
Yeah.
These kind of roadside attractions and stuff like that. And he's populating the series with all these characters, spitting out that mid-Atlantic kind of slang that you hear in those movies. See, he's everything is just so period accurate. Well, it's this mix between period accurate, but also this idealized Hollywood version of this stuff. And it's really easy to pick that up in the art, but in the writing is where it really comes through. That I feel like he was really underrated as a writer, because the series is so immersive. That I use that word a lot for this, but it just really resonates with how accurately he did it. I wish I would have planned out what I was going to say better, but I hope that's making sense.
No, I agree with you, and I was gonna I was gonna hold back on whether or not I was going to say this or not, because as you said, you came up at the same time as one of the more recent folks who's worked on the Rocketeer comics, and I was going to pose the question to you at some point during our episode here about post Dave Stevens Rocketeer stories. The stories that have come out since his passing, and they've done a lot of recent little 3 or 4 part series through IDW for the last 10, 12 or so years, and I love all things Rocketeer, so I enjoy all of these stories. But I do have to say, and this is probably going to be one of my only criticisms of, the more, I don't want to say modern is not the right word, but the more contemporary Rocketeer work that's not Dave Stevens' work, is it feels like a facsimile of Dave's work, and the writing to me does not, to your point, the writing to me in these newer stories, and I don't want to throw any writers under the bus for anything, they're wonderful stories. They just don't seem to have the same kind of heart and soul and the understanding of the time period, the vernacular, all of that stuff that the original Rocketeer stories have, that Dave Stevens' work has. Like I said, I enjoy these stories, but there's just something about each one of them. I get done reading it, I'm like, I'm so happy I got to read a Rocketeer story, but I wish it was a little bit better.
Well, okay, 2 things, or maybe 3. One, I think that's the nature of creator-owned comics. We get so used to that person's voice, that it does feel disruptive, because we keep thinking, oh, how would this have been if Dave drew it, or if Dave wrote it? So that's point 1. And I think that's just the nature of creator-owned stuff. Point 2, what I've seen of The Great Race looks absolutely beautiful, and I loved Stephen Mooney's stuff on Half Past Danger, his 1940s series at IDW. So that is strictly, my not having checked it out yet is strictly envy and FOMO. But one of the things that I did read was the Mark Waid, Chris Somney series. I can't remember what it was called, but I thought that had a lot of the charm of the original. But yeah, it's, that's a really high bar to hit.
Was that the Cargo of Doom?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to say what the cargo was, because I don't want to spoil it if somebody checks it out. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the books they've done have all been top notch, and everybody's bringing their A game. But as fans, I think it's really easy to look at this and just long for this unique voice that it's. If he were alive and supervising it, maybe these things would feel differently. But I think it is tied to the sense of loss that this amazing creator was taken too soon.
Yeah. I will say one of the more fun stories I remember reading of the post Dave Stevens era was when they did the crossover with The Spirit. I think that was a Mark Waid story as well. I forget who did the art on it, but yeah, the Rocketeer Spirit. I mean, I remember reading that and just thinking, oh, this is so much fun. It's the same kind of like when they do what did they do just recently too, like within the last few years? Batman and the Shadow. When they did that crossover, I'm like, oh, this is another 2 favorite characters of mine, and love to get to see them together. And it was so much fun to read the Rocketeer and the Spirit crossover.
Yeah, I think it was drawn. Wasn't it drawn by Paul Smith?
Now that you say that, yes, I think that sounds right.
Because I remember. Well, I think he was the last X-Men artist when I was reading X-Men. When he left, it is when I left the book.
Okay.
As a reader, and I'm blanking on the OGN he did with James Robinson. It was a Justice Society book. Richard Ory colored it. It was set like around the time of the McCarthy hearings. I can't remember the name of the book, but
Okay.
yeah, it was weird because, Paul Smith's X-Men stuff was this really clean line stuff. And I remember seeing that.
Was that the series called The Golden Age?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
that was it.
Okay.
I remember seeing that Justice Society. That's a hard word for me to say. Justice Society. I should just call it the Golden Age.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that and feeling like Alex Raymond drew it, Flash Gordon creator. And so, yeah, Smith was able to kind of channel elements of Eisner and elements of Stevens and his own work in that. And yeah, that was beautiful. I remember really liking Darwin Cook did a short story when IDW did those like anthology adventures.
Yes.
And I think his story had Betty in the helmet and the jacket.
I think so. I think that was kind of the first time. And I've seen since then, every once in a while. I haven't seen it C2E2, but I've seen it some of the other comic shows. Somebody will do the Betty Rocketeer.
Yeah.
I've tried to convince my wife to do it. She's not up for that.
But again, that's the thing too, where the movie also influences these latter day comics.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading an interview with Stevens where he's talking to Steranko, and Steranko's like, "Well, you've got to have him go and fight the Nazis," and Dave was like, "This flies in the face of my reluctant hero. I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
And again, it kind of circles back to the fact that the movie influenced a lot of our perceptions, and of course, it makes sense for the Rocketeer to fight the Nazis. We all want to see that, because it was such a great moment in the movie. Like when Paul Sorvino as the gangster with his big old Tommy gun is like, I may be a criminal, but I'm an American, or whatever he said. He starts plugging away at the Nazis. That was great. So, it's a natural thing for the Rocketeer, but yeah, and I think that might be one of the disconnects that we get from some of these more recent ones is, Stevens was always kind of stressing the reluctance of him, and he kept getting pulled into stuff. In the first one, he's on the run from Doc Savage. In the movie, they made it Howard Hughes, but yeah, in that first miniseries, it's Doc Savage, and the second miniseries, he's pulled in by the Shadow. Mr. Jonas is Lamont Cranston.
Yeah.
And there's just some really great stuff. Again, that's Dave with kind of a wink and a nod to everything that made up the Rocketeer and made up all the fiction that he loved. And yeah, just so good.
So let me ask you this one, and if you don't want to say, because you've got something sitting in your back pocket that you're going to pull out someday, feel free. But do you have, and this is probably kind of a silly question, do you have a Rocketeer story that if you had the opportunity to pitch it to IDW and say, hey, I've got the perfect Rocketeer story for you, here it is, do you have that Rocketeer story in your back pocket?
Yeah.
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 Do you want to say anything about it, or is it you need to keep it under wraps?
Sure, I'll tell you about it, because I don't think it's ever going to happen. Okay, well, I have two daydreams.
We're going to make sure that we're going to make sure that the top brass at IDW hear this episode, and then we're going to make it happen.
The first of my two daydreams is Mark Schultz, who is an amazing writer artist, known primarily for an independent series called Xenozoic, but Mark really gets adventure stuff. And my first daydream would be Mark would write a Rocketeer story and I would draw. I would draw it. But I also know that Mark knew Dave and he wants the Rocketeer to just be Dave, I think. So I'm never going to ask him to do that.
Okay. But
the second daydream, unsurprisingly, is the Rocketeer crossing over with my character, Athena Voltaire.
Yeah.
So the whole thing starts with Athena is tasked with flying something out to the Houdini family for. You're familiar with all the stuff about the seances on Halloween night.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the last one, like Walter Gibson, the creator of The Shadow, was also a stage magician and knew Houdini, and I believe he was there at the seances.
Okay.
And something weird happened at the last one. I can't remember what year it was. I want to say it's like 37 or 38.
Okay.
But my whole idea was Athena's been tasked with flying something out to Bess Houdini and Walter Gibson. And at the airfield, she runs into Cliff Secord. And, typical of stuff of that period, whatever case she's carrying looks like Cliff's, and they accidentally grab the wrong ones. And we find that Athena's being tailed by the Nazis. And so the Nazis split up and they also start following Cliff. And Betty is with Cliff when he runs into Athena, and they knew each other from the like air racing days and stuff like that. And Betty can't help but notice that Cliff seems a little too comfortable with this aviatrix. Yeah. So Betty, essentially gets, again, I'm trying to play with some of the tropes of period stuff. Yeah. So, just kind of let some of the ideas roll by. But Betty kind of dresses up like Athena. But the Nazis see her and think it's Athena and kidnap her. Yeah. And so during the kidnapping, Cliff is injured, breaks his leg, and contacts Athena for help. The whole culmination would take place at the Knickerbocker Hotel where the seance is going on. But, along the way, we would get these, more of these mistaken identity things like, Betty being mistaken for Athena, and then Cliff can't wear the rocket, so he's got to fly the autogyro that we saw in Rocketeer Adventure magazine, and Athena has to put on the helmet and the jetpack, and just kind of doing all those kind of dual type of things. And yeah, it would have been somewhere between an adventure and a screwball comedy. It's never going to happen, but that's like my dream gig. I don't know if it's enough to be a one shot. I mean, a mini series, but it would be a one shot.
I'm writing a note to self to start a letter writing campaign to IDW right now because I want to see this.
No, but yeah, I mean, well, right now, Athena's on hold. I'm part of a class action lawsuit. 40 different creative teams, I think, are suing Action Lab, the publisher, over breach of contract. So yeah.
I remember you were going through a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah,
you with your newsletter and some of the other times I talked to you, you're going through a whole lot of stuff with that. So
yeah, it's temporarily on hold, but we'll either find out something from the lawsuit or the contract ends in 2026. So one way or another, I'm going to get back to my character.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on stuff anyway. Yeah. But yeah, that's the story. And I didn't convey it well, but I have notes. I have many pages of notes.
No, I love it. In fact, as soon as you started talking, I'm like, oh, I bet Betty's going to get jealous. I bet there's good. Like in my mind, I'm already starting to picture. I'm like, yep, I can see this. At some point, if Athena doesn't put that helmet and that rocket pack on, I'm going to be upset.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are certain beats that you just kind of expect with this kind of crossover, and the Betty being jealous part is just such a nice role reversal that we got from the first and second miniseries that Dave did,
right?
Where Dave is always jealous of Betty. Dave is always chasing Betty. And so to suddenly put Betty in this position of vulnerability, not only flips the script, but it also humanizes her, because we don't want her to just be this unattainable goal that Dave has.
Right.
She then becomes a partner and a member of a relationship. So, yeah, I've probably given that way too much thought. That and sometime, if you ever want to do a 40th anniversary of the movie Big Trouble in Little China, I'll tell you about my comic miniseries pitch for Big Trouble: The Continuing Adventures of Jack Burton. That's like number 2 on my list. Rocketeer's number 1,
Yeah.
and bucket list number 2 is Big Trouble.
Nice.
Sad but true.
Oh, I have had so much fun talking Dave Stevens with you, talking Rocketeer stuff. I mean, I feel like we could just go on for the rest of the night. I'm just like, there's so many things like swirling around in my head, and just like I said earlier, to have the opportunity to talk with somebody else who's knowledgeable about and was influenced by Dave Stevens and this work, and we haven't touched. We've touched a little bit on the movie itself, and I guess one thing I was going to ask you before we end our time here is, going from, because you were hooked before the movie even came out, so going from the page to the screen, when you saw the Rocketeer movie for the first time, was it one of those times, and I think you mentioned this earlier about something else, was it one of those times where you went to go see the movie and you were like, okay, I hope they get this right. I really want this to be just the perfect thing that I've envisioned in my head. When you saw the Rocketeer movie, did that happen for you? Was there anything about the movie that, I guess, did the movie hit you in a way that you're like, this is perfect, this is exactly what I was hoping for? And was there anything that you were like, I wish that would have been done just a little bit differently?
No, I felt like all the changes were perfect. Obviously, having to change Betty to Jenny made perfect sense. And again, I just think about that hangar scene where the doors are opening up and we hear the first notes of that beautiful James Horner score, which you could not ask for a better score for that movie. I mean, because he's riffing on Aaron Copland,
yeah.
American composer Aaron Copland, especially some stuff from like Hoedown, I think, is like kind of reminiscent in the Rocketeer score, and it just feels so right for the time period. That whole 30s type of vibe. You're riffing on the greatest American composer up to that point. Maybe it's debatable afterwards. I don't think it is, but everything about that was just, it was so right. And when they had to make changes, the changes all made perfect sense. Of course we can't put Doc Savage in this movie, but Howard Hughes is a brilliant stand-in, and Terry O'Quinn is amazing. And my gosh, is there anybody better for Cliff than Billy Campbell?
Oh, no.
Which, by the way, if there's ever an Athena Voltaire movie, Billy Campbell would play her dad in A Perfect World, because that's who I draw. I draw Dave Stevens and I draw Billy Campbell as her dad.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mix of those two. But yeah, it's just this. There's something about that movie that just hits all the right beats. Again, when you have scenes that aren't from the comic but feel like they should be, like everything in the South Seas Club. Yeah. I mean, just the way it all looked. Timothy Dalton just was a great bad guy, and just like his whole heel turn, where Neville Sinclair is talking perfectly properly, and then the instant he's revealed to be a Nazi, he suddenly has the accent, and just there were so many things in there that had the same kind of reverence, I think, to the source material and the material of the period that is apparent in Dave's work. So, yeah, everything about that movie just hits.
Yeah.
You know, Adam Arkin doesn't look like Doug Wilde, but the relationship between Cliff and Cliff and Peavy is just perfect. You know, it's the mentor and the you know, even giving some nuance to Peavy when Cliff says, you know, you haven't had a date in however long, and Peavy just wistfully kind of thinks about the last gal he dated, and after that, there's no one else or no one can compare or whatever he says. It's just it's these beautiful little character details that they fleshed out of what Dave had in the book, but so good.
It was Flora Maxwell. There wasn't any point dating nobody after her.
Well played. Go get him, kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a perfect comic book movie.
Yeah.
All the changes make sense. It looks and it feels like it lives in that world, and it just feels right.
Well, and you bring up the James Horner soundtrack for that too, and I on our show, in the hundreds of episodes we've had, we've talked about, you know, different composers that we love, and if you would have asked me years ago, I probably would have said for movie soundtracks, you know, overall, I probably would have told you John Williams is one of my favorite, just because of so many iconic scores. But lately, within the last several years or so, I've actually turned a bit, and I've said several times, I'm like, no, I actually think James Horner is probably my favorite movie composer. You know, there's a little bit of a connection there because there were a lot of movies. My dad and I used to watch movies together a lot. A lot of the movies that we would watch together, some of his favorites were scored by James Horner. James Horner actually died the same week my dad died. And so there's a little bit of a connection there too. So that was kind of like, I was already hit by one thing, and then like the next week or so, boom, like one of our favorite movie composers, you know, passed away as well. So that's always kind of imprinted in my mind. I have I for Christmas one year, I had tracked down the expanded Rocketeer soundtrack that had every possible track that you could get on it. I think it was a 2-disc deal, and managed to get somebody to get that for me as a Christmas gift, and love that soundtrack. I mean, I will put that on if I'm at work and I just need to put earbuds in and you know, tune everybody else out and get my stuff done. Typically, I will put on the Rocketeer soundtrack and go from there. Some of the things I think about his Rocketeer soundtrack, and even as much as I love James Horner, I've also been one of the first to comment on our regular movie episodes about how, you know, he is guilty of reusing a lot of his soundtracks in a lot of his movies. You know, you'll listen to, what was it? I think one of them was Project X, and the scene where the apes are getting out of their cages is lifted straight from Aliens from 1986. So, you know, there are times when he definitely lifts things from other places, but the Rocketeer soundtrack sounds totally unique. It's not like any of his other soundtracks. Although I'm trying to remember what collection it was. I believe there is a collection of James Horner work that was released posthumously, and it was his, I don't think the title was Unfinished Compositions, but it was like a list of compositions that weren't quite finished. And I don't remember exactly what the title was. I'm blanking out on that part, but I'm listening to this, and there is a moment in one of the songs where it just very, almost like at the drop of a hat, it actually shifts, and you get that really soft piano of Jenny's theme, like the love theme.
Yeah.
And I was, all of a sudden, I like bolted upright, and I'm like, that's from the Rocketeer. What song is this? I need to find the title of it. And so, I mean, it was something he wrote much later, but he did, you know, pull that out of the Rocketeer soundtrack. And I say all that to say too, if anybody is listening to this and you want to, if you're sitting there and you're reading Rocketeer comics and you want to put music on that reminds you of the Rocketeer while you're reading Rocketeer comics or anything similar to that, might not even be a bad one for the Athena Voltaire, since we've got the aviation piece to all these stories. Is James Horner also did I think he did the score for a documentary on flight, and there are so many of those pieces that in the back of my mind I'm like, yeah, I could see that as a little bit of like a spiritual successor to the Rocketeer soundtrack. Is you've got, I know James Horner was himself, I believe he was a pilot himself. And so I think so. You get from his music that sense of, he knows what it's like to be a pilot. He knows what it's like to be up in the air. And it's just, a lot of that reminded me of some of the bits and pieces of the Rocketeer soundtrack too.
Well, to your point, and this isn't really him reusing it, but I vividly remember for a solid decade after the Rocketeer came out, that opening theme was used, the piano part from the very beginning was used in at least a dozen movie trailers.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's because the Rocketeer didn't do gangbusters at the box office, right, but everybody recognized just how brilliant the score was and how well it would work for so many trailers. So yeah, again, it's just top to bottom. The movie, the score, everything about it is perfect.
I feel like there was a movie that we covered recently that used the Rocketeer theme in the trailer. I want to say it might have been. Oh shoot! I want to say it might have been the movie Sneakers with Robert Redford. I'm trying to remember. Like there is in the back of my mind, there was a movie that we talked about recently, and as soon as the trailer came on, I'm like, wait, what? That's the Rocketeer. It was either that or they might have done one for oh shoot, what was the other? Was it Always? Always, yeah, it might have been Always. I feel like there was a bit of the Rocketeer theme that might have been used in the trailer for that one. But we're always kind of commenting on trailer music too. That like, certain trailers, you hear a theme and you're like, oh yeah, they lifted that straight from that other movie, or wow, that music totally changes what that movie's about. If you actually go see that movie, that is not what that's not what you're going to go see. Like they make this sound happy and upbeat, and this is a story about serial killers. This is weird. Yeah, no, I've heard several times now the Rocketeer theme, or at least portions of it, get reused in other movie trailers, and it's just fun to have that pop up and sit there and go, yep, I know what that is. Well, Steve, thank you so much. Is there anything else before we go? I know there's so much more we could be talking about with the Rocketeer and Dave Stevens, and is there anything in particular that we haven't covered that the world needs to know about with any of this that we've talked about that we haven't talked about yet?
I think I've covered most of the Stevens stuff. Just if this drops before the Blu-ray Kickstarter is done, I highly recommend everybody either getting the Blu-ray or watching the documentary on demand. I believe it's called Dave Stevens Drawn to Perfection, which is kind of a riff on the art book they did, which was Brush with Passion.
Yeah,
I think that's the title. So it's. I just feel like he was such a unique and amazing talent. I'm really looking forward to watching the documentary, although I've already warned my art nerd friends that I'm going to watch it with that I will probably embarrass myself because I'm at the age now where I tear up during Hallmark card commercials. So, I'm gonna lose it during the documentary, I'm sure.
Yeah, that is nothing to be ashamed of. I'm kind of that way too.
It happens. It just happens. I swear. I don't know if it's having kids or what, but it happens.
So I was looking up real quick at the Kickstarter. It says there are 10 days left to go. So what is that? That's probably, actually, I think it's Friday, December 2nd is when this ends. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to see about getting this put out before we get to December 2nd, or at the very least, I'll put stuff out on social media. And
I put the screws to you.
Yeah. And I'm like, nope, we're gonna get this out because we're gonna need more people to know about this so they can go get that Blu-ray or get some of the other stuff that's coming out with it. Because a few days ago when I saw that, I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. All right, well, one more thing. I got a birthday and I got Christmas coming up, so I know exactly what I'm buying myself. My dad was always good about buying himself something, so I'm gonna follow the tradition, and I know what I'm getting for myself. So.
Oh, that sounds great.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you again so much. I was so looking forward to being able to sit down and talk with you. We get to chat for a few minutes every year at C2E2, and just the chance to get down and sit down and talk with you some more. And I've been looking forward to this so much. Is there anything else of your own work that you want to share with the world? Anything that we should be going to check out right now? I was going to tell you again, I told you at C2E2, I got your last Athena Voltaire Kickstarter and loved that book. I think I devoured it in record time and then reread it again. Just enjoyed it so much. So if anybody's listening and they want to go check out your work, I highly recommend checking out the Athena Voltaire stuff, because I think I've bought everything Athena Voltaire at this point, and it certainly is, it is. You're not Dave Stevens, but you're giving me my Dave Stevens fix, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, Dave Stevens, Mark Schultz, and Al Williamson are kind of my three that I vacillate between. But yeah, thank you. That's really kind. And yeah, I'm. If I haven't scared anyone away with my over enthusiasm, my site is stevebryantcomics.com, and I'm in the process of putting together a web store so you can buy the Athena stuff directly from me. I'm going to try to have like signed and remarked, sketched in versions of the books. So that'll be either sometime in December or early January. So that's really my big plug for this. I'll have some Kickstarters coming next year. I really enjoyed, you mentioned the most recent Athena book. I really enjoyed, by doing the Kickstarter, I kind of co-published with Action Lab. So I was able to go for a better quality of paper and a heavier weight of cover. And I really enjoyed being able to kind of upgrade the book. So I'm looking forward to doing more Kickstarters and doing more self-publishing, because I feel like, again, I know where I am in the hierarchy of comic creators. So I think self-publishing gives me a chance to at least do the kind of work that when I have control over how it looks, I can at least make objects that I really like. So, follow me on social media, sign up for my newsletter, all that stuff's on my website, and you'll be barraged with news when the next Kickstarter comes.
I also saw, because I get your newsletter as well, I saw that we're both watching Alaska Daily right now.
Boy, isn't that great?
Yeah, I love that show. And that was before I went into education. My first major in college was journalism, and I was totally, and I'm gonna draw it all the way back to a Clark Kent thing. When I was in high school, I joined the high school newspaper because it was the same year that I had to get glasses for the first time, and I was like, you know what? I love Superman. I had to get glasses at the end of my junior year of high school, and it was senior year of high school. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go all in on this whole Clark Kent thing. I'm going to work for the newspaper. I'm going to wear these glasses all the time. I'm probably going to wear a Superman shirt underneath whatever shirt I'm wearing, just to be a complete nerd. And we're going to go that route. So when I started, I went to University of Illinois. When I started at Illinois, it was for journalism. And so my first year and a half to 2 years was in the journalism program until I ended up switching over to education. And And there was just there was something about the opportunity to kind of relive my favorite character and be that that kind of like that hero journalist, all the thing, when Superman's not saving the world, he's still saving the world, but he's doing it through his journalism.
Right.
And so that was always like one of my favorite little like secret things is like, that's why I'm going into journalism. But then I one of the things that I've really loved about, your stories and what you've been able to do, especially with the Kickstarter stuff, is, just some of the characters that we wouldn't normally get to see, or some of the opportunities that I think the self-publishing affords, is just so much fun. And I feel like I hope it gives you more freedom.
Yeah. I'm really enjoying just the, being able to talk directly with the audience has been great. And I feel like it's kind of, it harkens back to the early days of webcomics, which is where I started on the Athena stuff. And there's something about that, especially since comic distributors are kind of all up in the air right now. Yeah. There's something really cool about just knowing that I can deliver this, I can send this off to my audience, and we kind of maintain this conversation. And it's kind of weird. I hear a lot of comic creators talking about their brand, and I've never been good at that. I hope that whatever story I want to tell is going to be interesting to the people that already buy my other work. So, I've got Athena Voltaire, I've got The Catch, I've got Ghoul Scouts, and it's really just kind of a reflection on whatever I'm enjoying in other media. And so it's been kind of fun to take people along and just say, oh, well, thank you for trusting me. Here's, a horror story, or, a kid's story, or whatever. And so far, nobody said, well, I really like this, but this just sucks. So
no.
Go team.
And I realized I got off on my journalism tangent, and then I went to something completely different. It was going back to the Alaska Daily thing. Like yes. That, watching that show has brought me back to, like, I'm working in education now, and I'm not going to say I love my job every single day, but it has me at different moments in time when I'm watching that show. I'm like, I bet I could still write a good story if I sat down and really thought about it. And I mean, do I really want to? If I'm not content in education right now, it's been a lot of years. Could I switch back into reporter mode? Could I get back into that again? And I make the mistake sometimes of watching shows like that, and I go, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go live in Alaska, and I'm going to write for a newspaper. And I'm going to do, and every once in a while, my wife will kind of look at me, and she's like, if you're going to do that, please give me a heads up real quick before you make any like major decisions like that. But no, we've been enjoying that show, and I think that's part of the reason. It's given me like my Clark Kent vibe when I watch that show.
Well, okay, I don't want to go too political on this, but yeah. and I mentioned this in my newsletter when I talked about really enjoying the show. It's the kind of show in its earnestness and the way that it talks about the integrity of journalism and journalists, that I think 10 years ago, we would have looked at it like and thought it was a little too earnest or a little too self-important. But, and again, not to go too far onto a political tangent, but after, 4 to 6 years of hearing a lot of members of government refer to the press as an enemy of the state, that show, everything it's saying about journalistic integrity and freedom of the press, and the importance of journalism, really resonates. It lands very differently now than it would have a decade ago, because now I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm not quite tearing up, but there's that moment of just going, yeah, this is important. And
anytime anybody on that show uses the phrase "the importance of local journalism," like, yay, Raw team.
Exactly. Because I'm about 2 hours south of you, I think.
Yeah.
And down here, places like media conglomerates like Sinclair Media are gobbling up all the television stations, and that's dangerous. It's dangerous anytime there's a large, regardless of your political POV.
Yeah. Anytime
there's a large group of places reporting the same news the same way, I feel like we're not getting the truth. And I feel like I saw someone on social media today, a journalist that said objectivity is different than being neutral. Being neutral talks about presenting two different sides of an issue, and objectivity talks about just presenting facts. And I feel like we can all get our news filtered through stuff, but local stuff generally tends to be a lot more about objectivity.
Yeah. And you want to kind of harken back to the day when you feel like, if you knew your reporter, you knew you could trust them. If they were somebody local and you're like, well, I know that person. I know that they're going to tell me the truth. Even if I don't agree with everything that they say, I know the intent behind their reporting. I know what they're doing. I trust that they have my best interest. Again, even if we don't agree with each other, I trust that they have the best interest of the public at heart. And the more you kind of get away from that local stuff and that ability to trust your sources, trust your reporters, that's where I feel like you said, it starts to get a little dangerous.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I grew up next door to Walter Cronkite. Boy, that joke would have landed much better if I didn't mispronounce his name. But great, I'm amusing myself. I think that's probably a good sign to wind this down.
I'm amused.
But no, I feel like it's just a really wonderful show, and I'm hoping they can maintain their quality.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, again, Steve, thank you so much. And I'm going to find other excuses to get you back on here as well.
Oh, please, please.
Just so we can talk some more. If there's any, let me ask you this, to tie it back to our usual, our regularly scheduled movie program. Other than The Rocketeer, because right now we're in the 90s. Other than The Rocketeer, what's your favorite movie from the 90s?
We've already missed the window for it. T2.
Oh, yes.
Huge James Cameron fan.
Yeah.
So, I know that True Lies has gotten a little creaky in how it's aged. But that would be what, 94?
94,
95?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
I'm trying to think of other 90s stuff that I really enjoyed. LA Confidential, but we're 6 years out on that.
We got a few more years to that one.
But I know there's plenty.
Yeah.
It's weird because I feel like the late 80s, early 90s is this mid 80s through early 90s is this really sweet spot for like James Cameron and John Carpenter. Actually, all of the 80s. Back to 79 for Carpenter, I think. All that stuff is just really good, but I think I missed my window for it. So we'll just have to
we'll find some others.
Touch base as we go.
We'll find some others. There's plenty of other good stuff out there. That was the thing before doing this podcast, and especially, I mean, we started it 7 years ago now. And so we started in the mid 80s when we first started doing this. And I remember when I was growing up, my dad would make the comment sometimes, especially in the mid 90s or so, he would always make these comments. He'd be like, there's no good movies now. And, I remember going in high school, going in middle school, high school, going to see movies in the mid 90s, late 90s. And, thinking, I don't know, some of these are okay. Some of these are fine. But I kept, even as a kid, I always kept looking back to the 80s and be like, that is like the greatest decade of movies ever is the 80s. And then as I grew up, I was like, well, there's some really good stuff in the 60s and 70s, and there's good stuff in every decade. And as we've been doing this podcast, and then it kind of forces me every year, because just recently, within the last several weeks, I've put together our slate of movies for next year. And when I go through there, I'm like, yeah, I don't know how many good movies 93 had. And then I start to make the list, and I'm like, wait, so there's only 52 weeks in the year. We come out weekly. I don't have enough weeks for all the movies I want to talk about. And it's every single year. Every single year, I'm like, yeah, there probably weren't all that many great movies in 93. Ah, crap. There's so many good movies.
I'm sure that like the instant we hang up on Zoom here, I'm going to go, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah was released in 93, 94, or whatever. So yeah, that's the beauty of it. There's so much incredible. I hate the word content, but that's like become the buzzword around all this. But there's so much incredible work.
Yeah.
To discover and revisit. It's a golden age.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to find an excuse to get you back on here so we can talk about some more stuff. But yeah, again, thank you so much. I was so looking forward to being able to talk Dave Stevens, Rocketeer stuff with you. I have been, ever since we talked about this, a couple months ago. I was so excited. I was like, okay, I cannot let this opportunity go. Like it's almost, the year is almost over. I got to get this in, during 2022. So it's still the 40th anniversary. So thank you so much for hanging out with me here tonight. And just, I have enjoyed this so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your patience, because I know that like you had certain things you wanted to cover, and I just kind of came out like the Tasmanian devil going, woo!
That is half the time our show is a collection of Tasmanian devils, all just talking about what we love about each of these movies. So as much as the other guys will attest on this show too, as much as I have an outline, I am also the worst when it comes to sticking to that outline, because invariably we'll talk about something and it'll be 30, 40 minutes later and I'll just look back at my outline and go, forget it. we're good. This is even better than plan A. So we're good.
Okay, awesome. Well, you have a great holiday season, and I hope I'll see you at C2E2. What is it? End of March, beginning of April.
We're back to the spring now, so
I think so. Yeah.
So people, instead of complaining how cold it is in August in Chicago, they can complain how cold it is in March in Chicago.
But yeah, we'll complain about anything. It's just comic people's nature.
Yeah, just,
myself included.
Folks, when you go to the cons, just when you dress up as Harley Quinn, just bring a coat. If you're coming to the Chicago con, you can wear your skimpy Harley Quinn costume, but bring a heavy coat. You're going to need to.
Well,
so
Harley could be very sensible.
Yeah.
So I think that works.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been so much fun to talk Rocketeer, Dave Stevens stuff to kind of honor the 40th anniversary of this. I am going to put a bunch of stuff in the show notes for this episode. We're going to tweet out a bunch of stuff. Depending on whether this episode comes out before or after that Kickstarter, the Drawn to Perfection, I'm going to share out a bunch of stuff there. Go get that Blu-ray. Just make sure I get my copy first, and then you can go get a Blu-ray of that documentary and check that out. But definitely check out Steve's stuff as well. And as always, as we tell you here every week, be excellent to each other. Go watch some good movies. Go read some great comics, and we'll see you back here next time.